Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm thrilled about our discussion today. We have Dr. Karen Wilson with us here, and I know her from Child Nexus, which is a network that I'm part of. Made for Math joined, I think last year. And what I love about what you're doing over there, Dr. Wilson, is that you're trying to gather experts all in one place. So it's not just people like us, it's psychologists, it's a therapist, it's people that provide all sorts of expertise. I think even OTs over there, there's so many choices. And so I love your mission around that because parents are always looking, right? And so it's a great place for referrals. But your daytime job is actually doing neuropsychology, which is why you're here with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. What am I missing? What else should I share?
No, I think you've shared everything, like I think everything I do is aimed towards helping kids who think and learn differently and helping them be identified when they're having a struggle and connect them with people who can help them thrive.
Yes, perfect. Yeah. So with that, today, we're going to have you just share a little more about your job as a neuropsychologist. So specifically around this dyscalculia. So what role does a neuropsychologist play in diagnosing this dyscalculia?
Yeah, I think as a neuropsychologist, part of our role, anytime I'm going into any type of assessment, it's usually to just figure out why a child is struggling. When we talk about dyscalculia, it's really about math struggles, right? But oftentimes parents might not know why a child is struggling. They may not know that it's a specific learning disorder in math. And so they're coming to me to figure it out. Is this really a struggle with math, or is something else going on? Is this just a lack of motivation? Is this anxiety? Is this an attention problem? And so my job as a neuropsychologist is to help identify, again, why a child is struggling, because that really informs what the intervention is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when people are coming at you, I know you're using lots of assessments. And if they say math is the main struggle, you're not looking just at math. Will you describe a little more about the tools?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, when we think about it in like a neuropsychological assessment, the testing piece is just a portion of that broader assessment. So the assessment actually begins with just conversations with parents about, what are you observing at home in terms of your child's struggles? What does that look like? And talking to teachers about what are they observing in the classroom, having parents and teachers complete rating forms in addition to talking to them, one-on-one. And then, talking to the kids about their experience on school. What's easy for you? What's hard for you? What do you like? What do you not like? And that helps us to kind of identify, where the struggles kind of lie. And then, of course, they come in and they do, a comprehensive battery of tests, which help us to determine, how are they performing relative to their peers in specific areas. Math would be one of those areas. Reading might be another one, language skills, attention, memory. And then we also want to know not just how they're doing relative to their peers, but how are they doing relative to themselves? If they've got a struggle with math, do they have a struggle with math, but they don't struggle with reading? Do they co-occur, both math and reading? Because that really helps us determine, what is the kind of the range of struggles a child is experiencing. And there may be more than one place where we need to intervene. And that helps us to determine, what that should look like moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the assessments also end up uncovering strengths that might have been hidden.
Absolutely. And those are critical. I tell parents all the time that the strengths are just as important, if not more important, than areas of weakness, because that's what we can use to to compensate for areas of difficulty. I often give the example of a bunch of kids that I've seen have had this profile where they're really struggling with, for example, attention, or they're struggling with memorizing or like understanding some specific facts, but they've got, exceptional memories. And so they use that, stellar visual memory or auditory memory to compensate for other areas of weakness. And knowing that is really helpful when you're kind of designing interventions for kids.
Yeah, absolutely. I've run into that too before, where a student had wonderful auditory memory, and it just happened to be the reading assessment he was receiving for comprehension was a topic he was well versed in.
Right.
So it didn't even work because he already knew the answers just from being exposed to the knowledge, right? He had auditorily heard the stories, didn't have them read to him. So it's a really interesting thing. So I'm curious, can you describe a little bit more about what the assessment process looks like? It's
Hmm.
quite the drawn out process.
Yeah.
There's usually long wait lists. Like, what does it look like if someone came to see you?
Yeah, like I said, it would start with the parent interview and, teacher interview and rating forms. But then when the child comes in, we are going to have them perform, different types of tasks that look at the way that they learn, look at the way they solve problems. We're going to give them tests of math, tests of reading, tests of writing. And then we're also going to look at where things are breaking down. So if I'm looking at, for example, a child who's struggling with math, I'm going to want to look at kind of, where are things breaking down in the math? Sometimes it's with math facts. They just don't have those math facts. For some kids, they know their math facts, but they just can't, compute quickly. There's that automaticity with math.
Yeah.
And so there's a fluency problem where it just takes them longer to kind of process those math facts. And for some kids, they understand math calculations when they have those kinds of problems, but when you put the same computation in a word problem, they have no idea. And so that really tells us, again, where are things breaking down? Is it the math facts? Is it counting? Is it in their fluency of math? Is it in the application of math concepts? And so that again helps us to intervene. And we also want to look at other processing issues that can interfere with learning and impact a child's ability to access their curriculum. So I think of a child whose parents might say, he came home and he had 50 math problems on this math sheet, but 20 of them were wrong. And so this must be a math disability. And then sometimes I'll look closely at the paper and it'd be like, oh, he added when he was supposed to subtract, subtracted when he was supposed to add, just wasn't paying attention to the sign because it was mixed up. They weren't all addition.
Yeah.
And then when you point it out to the child, it's like, oh, I was supposed to subtract, and then they do it and they do it correctly. Well, that's not a misunderstanding of math concepts. That's an attention problem.
Yeah.
So it really is not about just the math score. It's about observing their process, observing the strategies that they use. Do they have to rely on their fingers to count? And then when they run out of fingers, they don't know what to do.
Right.
Can they do certain things in their head? So it's not only about test scores, but it's about observing them while they're performing different tasks to, again, add to your understanding of where things are breaking down and what is making this particular task, for example, if it's math, harder for them than it is for other kids, or harder for them relative to other things that they do really well.
Sure. And so when you're doing all of this testing, how many days does this typically take? How many hours long sessions are we talking about here?
Yeah, it depends on the child. Older kids can do it in 2 full days. And when I say 2 full days, it's like 9 a.m. to about 3 p.m. It's like a school day. And you get short breaks and you take a nice hour lunch break. So if they can, I tell parents, if they can go to school from 9 to 3, they can do this from 9 to 3 with short breaks. And again, they get a nice long lunch break. Kids who are younger, who may have a shorter, or those who might have a shorter attention span, we might break it up into 3 short mornings, 4 short mornings for, hour and a half or 2-hour blocks with breaks. So it really depends on their child, the age of the child, their ability to sit still, their attention span, their frustration tolerance. All of those kinds of things go into play when we're determining, how we structure the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then once you're done, I know that you have to go back and put all the data together, generate your reports.
Yes.
Those pieces take a while. So how long does that process usually take you to get results and go over those with parents?
Yeah, because we're gathering a lot of information from different sources, a lot of it depends on when we get that back. Because sometimes, I can finish my scoring the week after doing the assessment, but if I'm still waiting on teacher rating forms, or, dad hasn't got to his forms yet, that can delay me getting feedback, because, all of that information is important in terms of giving a context to some of the struggles children are experiencing. But once I have all the data, usually if I have all the data and I have time to sit down and analyze it, I can have a feedback session with the family, within a week of having all the data.
Awesome. Now, I've been part of a feedback session, and I found it to be incredibly empowering. I was stunned that just in a few short days, someone really could understand my child and see them the way I see them. It was really
Mhm.
cool to see it on paper. What kinds of emotions do you see come out during those meetings from parents?
There's a range. Such a huge range. It can range from probably the most common is just relief.
Mm-hmm.
It's just relief because now there's an understanding, because oftentimes when we're observing something that we don't understand, we try to kind of add our own understanding onto the situation. And teachers do the same thing where it's like, oh, if he'd just try harder, he'd get it. Or, maybe if he didn't play video games all day, he'd have, more of an attention span to get his homework done. Or maybe he's just lazy, or, all of these kind of rationalizations. But then when you have the data and you get the information about why your child is struggling, there's a relief because now I understand why they're struggling, and there's hope because now there's a plan for moving forward. There's a plan for providing the appropriate intervention. There's a plan for getting the teachers on board and making sure your child is supported at school. And if there's, other kinds of therapies that are also needed, that we're going to connect you with individuals who will support your child in other areas, for example, with anxiety or some other struggles that a child might be having.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And I'm curious too, like we know from the research, this research is a little older. We had Dr. David Gary come
Mhm.
on the podcast as well, and he's saying 5 to 8% of school age children have dyscalculia. So I'm curious, are you seeing that in your work, that you're probably seeing maybe close to 10% of the kids coming through the door having a math learning disability of some sort, or does it feel maybe a little elevated right now?
Um, right now, I have to tell you that there are a lot of kids who come in with, specific learning disorders, but in terms of what I'm seeing, math is probably not the most common. I
Mhm.
see probably more kids with dyslexia than I do with dyscalculia. But that being said, there's a lot of overlap between
Yeah,
those two. A
yeah,
lot of kids with dyslexia also have dyscalculia.
yes,
And so, I probably see more kids with ADHD than I do with
sure,
dyscalculia. But
sure.
again, with any specific learning disorder, it's 1 in 5 kids has
Mhm.
some kind of specific learning disorder or mental health challenge that impacts their daily lives.
For sure.
Mhm.
Absolutely. And so what do you think is the youngest that somebody could bring them in for testing with you?
Yeah, I think probably by the end of first grade for dyscalculia,
Mhm.
because they've been in school long enough to kind of develop those initial counting skills, numerosity skills. And so when they're struggling with that understanding despite adequate instruction, then it's time to take another look,
Yeah,
right? And so
absolutely.
that's a good time because again, when you think about these learning disorders like dyscalculia, you have to make sure that children are exposed to the information first. It's why we
Yeah,
don't make a diagnosis in preschool for, for reading, because they haven't been taught how to read yet, or they haven't been taught how to add and subtract yet. And so we want to make sure that they've had time to, receive adequate instruction.
sure.
And then if they're still struggling, then we can take another look to see if they meet criteria for a disorder.
For sure. And I think the
Mhm.
research is also they're looking at preschool years. It's not that they would diagnose kids then, but
Right.
they're trying to mark them for they're at risk,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
That's
And you can
coming.
absolutely see kids who are at risk early
Hmm.
on. And that's
Hmm.
important as well. Like you said, you're not necessarily going to make a diagnosis then, of a math disorder in a preschooler. But if they're having trouble understanding this concept of counting, right? And that a number corresponds with an amount, and you're seeing this over and over again when other kids the same age get it, then it's kind of like, well, let's watch this child. Let's
Yeah,
provide some support as they enter kindergarten to make sure that they are, where they should be in
right.
their understanding of these pre-academic skills.
Right.
Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the last thing I wanted to ask you is there's a lot of names for dyscalculia. Um, and I've asked several people on this show about this. So for your purposes, when you're giving that diagnosis, are you putting that phrase in there? Or are you saying something more like math learning disability, specified, blah, 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 whatever. There's so many ways you can say it. I'm curious, how are you spelling it out? What are the different types and phrases we should be listening for?
Yeah, I mean, I use both because I think they're both important. And, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual that we use as psychologists uses the term specific learning disorder. And then you can distinguish between in reading, writing, or in mathematics. And so, when I'm submitting this for insurance, and that's the term that I have to use. But I also want parents to be able to search for information related to this. And you might not see specific learning disorder
Yeah.
everywhere. So
Right.
I say, also known as dyscalculia. And then I will give, places where they can go to find out more information about it. So I use both terms.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful. And I like that it's from an education standpoint. Yeah,
Absolutely.
And I think educators should be more familiarized with these so that when they see these reports, they can go and search for themselves. Same kind of thing. I love that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I loved chatting with you today. Those were our questions for the day. Is there anything else
that went by so quickly?
It went by really fast.
It did. I know. You know what? I think one of the things I would say is that dyscalculia can look different in different kids, right? And some of the red flags are, again, not understanding counting. I mean, that's one of the basic skills for learning, advanced math skills. Understanding symbols, that the symbol of a number corresponds to an amount. Like the number 2 is a symbol that represents 2 of something, right? Yeah. So if kids don't get that, that's kind of a red flag, over time. For some, and for it can also look like difficulty telling time on an analog clock, is often associated with dyscalculia. Understanding, math word problems. Johnny had 2 apples and his mom gave him 3 more. How many does he have? And not understanding those concepts. And so those are all indications that kids are struggling with math concepts. Also look at it in connection to other skills where, my child is an amazing reader and has great creative writing skills, but when it comes to math, it's harder for them. Either the grades are lower, or they have to spend so much more time to just process math information, right? And so, the teacher assigns 30 minutes of math and it's taking your child an hour and a half to get through that math worksheet. Suggests that there's a difference in their processing of that information. And they're struggling with it in a way that they are not struggling in other domains like reading and writing or some other aspects.
I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. And that reminds me of, we had a guest named Dylan, who's a statistician with dyscalculia. And what's so interesting about what she was saying is she's working 3-4 times harder in this subject than she was in any other subject. She was excelling in everything else, but really struggling in mathematics and still coming out with C's, D's, and F's, even though she was spending way more time than years on these subjects. And she just had a really hard work ethic. So I love that you brought that up, because I think that's one way for parents to draw a contrast. If your child's crying a lot during homework, melting down, running away from you, there's something deeper going on there. It's not just them being a stick in the mud for you.
Or saying, I hate math when they love to read. Or saying, I'm not good at math, when they don't say that about any other subjects, right?
Yeah.
And so like digging a little deeper and trying to find out why that is, why they feel that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So if a parent's suspecting that there's a bigger issue, where would you suggest is the best starting point for them?
Start talking with teachers. Sometimes that's a good place to start. And especially sharing your experience with your child doing math homework relative to other subjects is often helpful, because the teachers aren't home. Sometimes they get the homework turned in and it's done. They don't know the effort and the time and the tears the child had to go through to produce that final product, right? So a parent can share that information with teachers, and then teachers might, take a second look when they're doing math problems, in the classroom, and see what that looks like. And, that may lead to an assessment through the school district. If parents are really concerned and the school district is not as concerned, they may seek out a private assessment, may start with a math screen. They don't have to do a full neuropsychological evaluation if they're very concerned just about math. It could start with just a math screen to see where they are relative to other kids or relative to other, areas,
Yeah.
academic
Yeah,
areas.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea for sure. And
Mm-hmm.
don't give up. Don't give up on the
No.
teachers. Some of the teachers just don't know, but I think you're right that drawing the contrast can help them really understand and see what's going on, that you're not exaggerating. I went through that with reading with my son. The teachers thought I was crazy. She's
Mm-hmm.
just panicking at first. And I'm like, no, let me tell you what's happening. He's burning holes through his paper over writing. Like, he's
Right.
sobbing on the floor, this isn't just me being overreactionary. This is not a normal response to needing to write a paragraph.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's just not working for us anymore. So I'm looking to you for some guidance. And so that process that we went through with the neuropsych was awesome. And when the teachers received it, they were overwhelmed, with just
Mm-hmm.
so much empathy for what we were dealing with. And even though I tried to say this is what was happening, they had data saying this
Yes.
is what the child's really dealing with. Yeah.
Right.
Changed it.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. Well, as you know, we love to wrap up every episode with a math joke or pun. Do you happen to have one?
I have two.
Oh,
And I had to,
awesome.
and when we had a pre-conversation, I went to my kids to find, I said, do you guys have any math jokes for me? And I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. So that's the context of these jokes. So the first one is, what is a bird's favorite type of math?
I don't know. What is it?
Algebra.
I love that.
So that is from my 10-year-old.
That's
I'm going to tell
perfect.
you my 7-year-old's joke. So
Okay,
you get
let's
two
do
for
it.
the price of one.
Great.
Why did the triangle dislike having discussions with circles?
Oh, I don't know. Why?
Because they're pointless.
Because they're pointless.
So I think that falls in the geometry realm.
It
but
does. It
Those
does.
are my two jokes.
I almost said because they never get to the point.
Oh, there you go. That'd be another way of saying the same joke.
I love it. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure.
Yes.